TIFF opens this year with the sports drama Borg McEnroe, detailing the epic rivalry between the Swedish tennis legend Björn Borg and his greatest adversary, the brash American John McEnroe, which came to a head during the 1980 Wimbledon Championships. Joining me to discuss the film, our director Janus Metz, stars Shia LaBeouf, Stellan Skarsgård, and Sverrir Gudnason. Sverrir. I tried hard. I knew that was going to happen.
I'm used to it. It's okay.
Nice to see you all, and thank you for being here. Janus, I'll start with you. What was it that drew you to this story? Was it the historical context? Was it the rivalry between the men? Was it the characters? What was your entry point here?
Well, all of it, really. But first of all, of course, Björn and John were two legendary icons, and their famous rivalry in 1980 was something that made time stand still, you know, but I thought, you know, coming to this story as a filmmaker, it had to be more than a biopic or more than a tennis movie. It had to be about, you know, something universal, something that transcended the sport. When I read Ronnie Sander's script, I really found a beautiful story about, you know, deep existential questions about how two people individually were able to, you know, drive themselves to the edge and beyond in order to achieve something extraordinary. And you know, I'm, you know, in my previous movies as well, I've been very inspired or attracted to telling stories of, you know, characters on some sort of soul-searching trajectory, some sort of chase for a greater sense of purpose. And I really found that in this story, and it resonated deeply with me, not only as a filmmaker, but also personally.
So we have to talk about the casting, and we'll get to everyone else in just a sec here, but the leads don't just have to be convincing as characters who are familiar to a lot of people, from news footage if you're not old enough to have been there at the time or watched it at the time. But they also have to look like they know how to play tennis. So tell me about casting the film so that you covered all the bases.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing here was you know, realizing that on the one hand, it doesn't make sense to make a tennis movie or a sports movie because it's never about the sport, it's never about the tennis, it's always about the characters. But you know, if you have an interesting story that drives at, you know, some questions that you want to be talking about and drives at character drama, and I think to me that's essentially what Borg McEnroe is, a psychological thriller, if you like. Then obviously, you know, you're making a film about two legendary icons, the best tennis players in the world, and the tennis has to sell. It has to work. So without that, the movie doesn't work. And that meant that I had to, you know, put these two guys through intense training. And they were so dedicated in doing that. So they were doing boot camp for 6 to 8 months of tennis training every day. And obviously, you know, we used, you know, the magic tricks we have in our bag of movie making to sell that. But first of all, you know, it was a huge transformation of both Shia and Sverrir into athletes.
Had either of you played before? No, not at all. So, because I just saw the movie an hour and a half ago, and the last chunk of the film is very convincing in terms of the tennis match itself, all the way through, but that last half. Tell me a little bit about the kind of work that you did to make sure that I was going to buy in when I watched that last climactic battle between you two.
Well, we just played a lot of tennis. Mm-hmm. We started like half a year before the shoot. Tennis 2 hours a day, at least for me. Shia can't speak for himself, but 2 hours per day, and some physical training also. And that was just the key into the part, physical key, that you had to live that life as an athlete to understand the part of Björn Borg and McEnroe.
And Shia, this isn't the first John McEnroe script that you've been offered. I understand that Super Brat also came your way and you said no. What was it about this one that separated it from the other?
The one that I read before this was a satire, and it wasn't treating McEnroe's story with a whole lot of respect or any empathy at all. He was just sort of a clown, screaming shrew. And it wasn't necessarily the McEnroe role that I was first attracted to. I was a fan of his first film. I mean, when we were doing Fury, we just religiously watched Armadillo and stole things. Me and Bernthal would just steal things from his movie. And then I heard he was doing a tennis film, and I thought, what the fuck? That doesn't make any sense. And then read the script, and the script really moved me. Ronnie's script was like poetry, and it felt cathartic, a lot of the stuff that was in the script. So then the cast, but my first entrance into it was Janus.
Is John McEnroe misunderstood?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in what way? I mean, I've read Are You Serious? And you know, in it you have a man who's not looking really particularly to excuse his behavior, but he talks about where it comes from, and he talks about kind of interesting stuff about how he would fly off the handle, his famous catchphrase, "Are you serious?" He would say that, but the anger was sort of directed back at himself, I think, because he was a perfectionist, and it was coming back at him, and I see that reflected in this film.
It's a bit like watching Amadeus. He's like the Mozart character. So I watched Amadeus a lot. I don't even think he really understood, these. He wasn't asking himself these questions when this was going on. He was a young man. Everything was really loud and fast. So I don't think he was really searching. It wasn't going on. He was just trying to win. So only after he got off the tour, did he start having these questions about who and what. I don't think that was happening then.
Yeah. What place does Björn Borg hold in Swedish popular culture to this day?
I would say he's the biggest athlete the country has ever had, and he's well known in the rest of the world. I mean, in those days, those guys were the first rock stars of tennis. The sport was changing, and they were rock stars. So people still remember those guys.
The shots of you in the fur jacket, and that's a rock star. But all that stuff. The clothes and all that kind of thing, and I know it sounds kind of like a cliche, but it must have helped you put you in some sort of mind frame when you're wearing this, because they are detailed and they are very much of a period, I think. Does that help you at all? The costumes and finding to help find the character?
Yeah, but at the same time, you have to find the character within, because if you just put on a headband, it's gonna look uncool, But if you ground it in your character, then it's gonna fly.
And Stellan, what sort of research did you do? You're playing a real-life character as well, the Bjorg's coach, Lennart Bergelin. Tell me a little bit about playing someone who's real. He passed away in 2008, but he presumably has friends and family and that sort of thing that are still around who will see this. Do you feel a responsibility to that, or is it all on the page? Is the character that you're playing all on the page?
Well, 1 week before the opening in Sweden, a couple of days ago, I put in a phone call to his widow, Rosemary, and I said, "I'm sorry. I know I'm playing your husband, but it's not your husband." And she said, "Well, it's not a documentary." She's 90 years old. And she's right. I mean, it's very difficult whenever you do somebody that has existed or even does exist, as in some cases, you always have to. I always choose fiction before facts, because you serve the film. That's number one. But there are two things you have to think about. Don't hurt anybody. Don't hurt anybody, and also do not lie about history. You have a responsibility, and that's always a balance thing. But even if you make a documentary that like Janus did his Armadillo, even if you make a documentary, it's not the truth either. It's also subjective, and every piece of art is giving the audience a new subjective view of a subject, of a human, of whatever you're talking about.
Janus, would you like to respond to that as well?
Yeah, I think that's of course the nature of filmmaking. It's and it's certainly the only type of films that interest me is when you seeing films that where a director and actors have something to say about a certain slice of life, a piece of reality. You know, coming back to your question, whether McEnroe has been misunderstood. Maybe he's been misunderstood by some, but our story is really a prism through which we're looking at a specific incident in time and trying to learn from that and trying to understand, you know, what was it that brought about this kind of shattering of the sport and of, you know, these two characters that were on the surface pitted against each other as perfect opposites, but possibly had something deeper in common. Who were they? How did they become what they were? How did two very different societies at a particular point in time create two very different types of heroes? You know, you have welfare Sweden, you have a capitalist America of the 70s. Those kind of things resonate deeply within the portraits of Björn and John, and we learn from reality and we learn from their stories. But it only becomes film. It only becomes something that resonates and communicates once we have the courage to take that story and make it into a poetic truth. And that's the altar I bow to.
In the film, it's said about Borg that he's an iceberg keeping it all in until he becomes a volcano. And I would say that possibly the exact opposite is true of McEnroe, who is a volcano, but sort of more calculating on the inside. Is that something you'd agree with, Shia?
Sure. I think it's more complicated. I think he's a tactician. You know, he really added something different to the game. When he entered the game, it was baseliners. It was a power sport, and Borg was the king of that. He brought touch and feel and a sensitivity to the game that wasn't there before. It's not just screaming rage. He used rage as a tactic to throw people off, and he manufactured his intensity to hype himself up. In that way, he's an artist. It was very thought through, though it wasn't explained. It was very hard to sit at situations like this and explain that kind of tactical position in tennis at the time, because the narrative was cartoons. It was bad guy versus good guy, you know. And it was very hard to get to the honesty bit in a setting like this, and there really wasn't a forum for him to express that truth.
Well, there's a line that you have in the film that I've written down here. It says, "You don't understand what it means to play tennis." This is there's just after the Connors match, I think, and it's a press conference not unlike this. And he says, "You don't understand what it means to play tennis. None of you do because you don't play it."
You're missing some F-bombs in there, but that's close.
Yeah, for the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think to add to what Janus was saying, the only other person who could really understand that was the guy on the other side of the net.
I think if I can add to that, I mean, it was really about two very different ways of manufacturing intensity, and I think that's one of the things that we were trying to drive at in the film. You know, how do you create a sense of perfection or a sense of, you know, being in the present, and how did these two guys chase that? I mean, in some ways you could say this is a portrait of two drug addicts. I mean, their drug is tennis, their drug is intensity, their drug is, you know, being there now, here, and not worrying about, you know, more frightening questions as like, why am I here? Right. Why do you play like Borg did for hours and end against the garage door? Because it's fun, yeah, it's play, but it's also there's an element of you know, autism in there, I would almost say. You know, it's very, very driven people, and this film could, you know, just as well be a film about two artists or two top businessmen or two soldiers, if you like.
Well, I think that's what we were talking about off the top in that first question, is that sports movies are rarely ever really about the sport. Sure, there's a big tennis match at the end of this, and there's tennis all the way through it, but they really are about bigger things. They are about the artistry of the game. They are about the rivalry. They're about what you were talking about earlier in your first answer. And that really comes through in this film, where it's not just about the match. And I think that's one of the things that makes this film successful, because I think, just as part of the historical record, we know how the movie ends, essentially. So the journey is the important part, not exactly the destination. Both your characters are still alive, or characters are real people that you're playing here. Have you met them?
Yeah, I met Borg for the first time at the premiere.
So that was just last week, right?
Yeah, it was last week in the pre-premiere in Sweden, and I chose not to meet him during the shooting because I thought that would help me to just build from all the material I could find on him, and there's a lot. So I could watch the games, and I could read the books, and I could hear the interviews, stuff like that, and then do my own guesses.
And Shia, did you meet John McEnroe?
I haven't, but John, I'd love to meet you. He's a busy guy.
Yeah. So when you're playing a character, and Stellan touched on this, but when you're playing a character who is based on a real person, how much fiction, you talked about it, but how much fiction do you feel comfortable in adding in? Fiction, dramatic license, I guess, is the question.
I don't feel like I added much, actually. Ronnie did his research, and it's pretty factual. A lot of the stuff that, at least for the McEnroe part of the film, is all online. You can really watch it. And like the match, we rehearsed things like a ballet, including the outbursts. I mean, I would literally play them on a screen right before we would film and look at where everything was, and it was very paint by the numbers in a way.
I think it's, the research is done, of course, but at some point you got to free yourself from that and once again serve the rules of fiction. I think as with all biopics and all pics based on historical events, of course there's things that has been collapsed in time and put together, and they didn't necessarily happen exactly that way. But I think the important thing is to try and get at a deeper level of truth. And I think that's the film that we've been chasing. We've been fortunate enough to have conversations with Björn about it, and he feels that we really saw him, and that's obviously gratifying when you come out, and I think to all of you in here that've seen the film, I mean, you all realize it's not just a celebration of two historical figures. It's also a film that goes into very dark places. So if you can allow yourself to go there and still feel that you're getting a sense of appreciation from the people that you portrayed, I mean that's gratifying. But we all live lives. We all protect ourselves. We're all vain. So even if Björn and John had come out and said, you made a shitty film, it had nothing to do with me, I think bottom line, it's also about whether we feel that we made something true.
And Björn Borg's son is in the film.
He is.
Playing his father at a very young age.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really amazing thing that happened. I mean, we were casting for a kid to play Björn at the age of 13, and suddenly we get approached by Leo Borg, who writes us a letter, and that he would love to come for a casting. And of course, we knew very well who Leo Borg was. I was a little bit hesitant about it because I thought, if the movie doesn't go in a direction that Björn is, likes, then are we going to give this kid trouble around the dinner table back home with their family, or are they going to come stand on set and say, no, you have to do it this way, because otherwise we're going to, pull the plug. But we had some thorough discussions with the Borg family, and they totally understood what we were trying to do, and they said, no, it's Leo's thing, and he's going to be treated like any other actor on set. But I think, and then what happened was once we cast him, he was just undeniably so true, and of course it's Björn's blood, and it lends us a very strong authenticity to the film and to the part. And then, then he's obviously, of course, the best tennis player in his age group in Sweden. So the tennis was easy. We would just point and shoot,
Talk about working with him. Yeah.
He was asked at a press conference in Stockholm. He was asked, "Are you as good a tennis player at 13 as your father was at that age?" And he said, "Better."
Stellan, one of the bits of advice that you give to Björn in the film over and over again is don't think, don't think. And I found that really interesting because I've often heard that actors, one of the things that is sort of helpful, I guess, is you learn everything about it and then you try and put it out of your head and just let it come. And I wonder if you saw a parallel between the athleticism that your character was pushing his protege toward and acting.
Definitely. I don't know what it is. I mean, there's a lot of really, really good actors that are actually really, really stupid. You don't need to think in front of the camera, but it can help you in your career or in your choices and everything, but in front of the camera it doesn't help. But I think what I think it has to do with is sort of that the process of thought blocks a flow. And that flow is, when you're an actor, the flow in front of the camera of emotions or reactions and being fast enough and turn fast enough emotionally to what's going on in the very scene. And it's the same thing when you're playing tennis. You got to be there on instinct more than thought.
I'm going to turn it over to the audience, and I have a feeling, Bruce Kirkland traditionally opens with a question.
Good afternoon. Welcome to TIFF. I'm Bruce Kirkland, Toronto Sun. So I'd like to return to something that was spoken about earlier. And Janus, you made a very eloquent plea to see this film beyond the sports genre picture, which is sort of mundane. You know, like most sports pictures are mundane. This is obviously does something different. I would love to hear from the actors now as to how far they think it goes beyond the kind of performances they put in. And what I mean by that, for example, Shia, when you're playing McEnroe, you can't think, well, I'm making a statement about misunderstood people for everyone to see. That would be ridiculous while you're acting. Film's finished. Thoughts now in terms of how this film impacts beyond the performances you gave.
Yeah, it's quite cathartic. I mean, I could, but I'd put my foot in my mouth. I mean, it's quite cathartic. Watching it is yeah, I knew it when I read it. It touched me when we did it. There was no reflection, obviously, on the day. To watch it now is something I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of the movie, and I think it expresses something I feel deeply, and am honored to be able to have been a part of this and to be able to share it.
When we enter the movie, Björn is in a bad place because he's been winning and winning and winning and winning everything that he could win for many years. So I think that feeling of everybody expecting you to win makes you not eager to win, but you're afraid to lose. And that's where he is at the moment. And I think the interesting part of the film is the psychology. But for me, to get there, it was just my goal was to do Björn as true as I could, and then the script gave me the rest.
Stellan, do you have a thought you'd like to add?
Not really.
Okay.
I think they're so good.
We'll move on right here.
Yeah. Hello. Marco Consoli, Il Venerdì, Italy. I have a question for Shia. I want to ask you, do you feel close to John McEnroe, considering that all journalists were asking him about behavior and he wanted to talk about tennis? And maybe all journalists want to ask you about your personal life and you would like to talk about acting. Is this why you are not giving interviews anymore? Thank you.
I'm not giving interviews. Yeah, I'm right here. Yeah, this is another parallel that I feel with him, for sure. Yeah, it's part of the cathartic feeling of the film for me. Yeah.
Let's go right here. Yep. Oh.
I actually have a question for Shia and Sverrir. Is that how you pronounce it? Sverrir. I actually learned to play tennis when I was 34, and I wanted to ask you guys, I found it extremely addictive after I learned. Do you find, I mean, aside from the film, you feel like you want to play tennis all the time? Like, is it a sport? Do you feel like, and I mean that as a serious question, because when I first learned psychologically, it changed me somehow. I wanted to play, and I have ever since. Have you guys felt the same way?
I liked it. So I'm not playing all the time, because I moved on to the next part where I'm playing trumpet. So
Okay.
so I was learning that, but now I'm back to tennis. I play once a week.
I learned it more like a dance to a metronome. It was dance moves. I mean, you could have given me 20 years and I would have never played like McEnroe. So pretty early on in our process, after the screen test, we knew what exactly we needed to do. And I started learning it like a dance. I never actually played tennis. It was something different. And while we were filming, and even before that, I broke my foot practicing with this man. And yeah, my recovery took a while, and so I just haven't gone back to playing.
Go ahead, right here in the back. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, right here. We have a microphone. No, we have a microphone for you. And identify where you're from, too, please.
Hi, Scott Orland with Cinema Magazine. Shia, and if you guys could address this, we all think we know Björn Borg and John McEnroe. I mean, and everything has shades of gray. I mean, from either what we've seen on TV or in interviews. In your research and in actually inhabiting these characters, just at least cinematically, what did you think insight you got about them? What do you think? I mean, obviously, you don't really know what makes them tick, but did you gain a new sense of admiration for them about who they are as people, not just as athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know much about his upbringing, how he came to be. Very loud household, and a scared guy. You know, a small guy, grew up in Queens, a rough area. My idea of tennis was very white collar. He was entering it in a different way. His father really and his mother really pushed him. And there was no, you know, an A+ wasn't enough. So I think I really just empathized with the fact that there was just no way to win, you know, and it's what made him so competitive in his life. And so, yeah, the fact that he could stand up and hold his head high and put himself out there and be as vulnerable as he was and exhibit that kind of emotion, I really, you know, I respect it.
I didn't know that Björn Borg, as a kid, was like a little McEnroe, in the sense that he had these feelings outside, and he screamed a lot on the tennis court. And he had to learn to keep those feelings within to not be suspended. So that was something I learned about, that Borg, he is very human, because you can see him on the field when he's like a iceberg, but he's actually very human. And after I met him now in Stockholm, I can say he's very nice guy.
Well, and in real life, McEnroe and Borg have stayed friends, right? Didn't they best
They're
man at one
very
another's
good friends.
weddings and that sort of thing? Yeah. Interesting what you were saying about McEnroe's upbringing. And there's a scene in the film where he's doing math puzzles for his family's friends, and the father keeps pushing. Do one harder, do one harder. And so they give him some astronomical number to multiply, and he can't do it. He blanks. And the looks of sort of disappointment all around when he doesn't have the answer, I think is part of what you were saying about that search for perfection, because he didn't get it unless he was perfect. And I wonder, and I don't know how deeply you went into this, but after the Connors match, which is considered to be kind of a perfect game for John McEnroe, if it was almost as if he had hit such a high bar there that it was unlikely he would ever do it again. And that was, there's a great piece, I think it was in Esquire, where he says, the writer says, the victory thus marked a year during which McEnroe would gradually sense what perhaps only exceptional athletes can sense, the moment of their own demise, because they've hit perfection, and it's probably never going to happen again.
I don't think that went through McEnroe's head. No. You know, he dominated tennis till the mid-'80s and the composite rackets came out. I mean, he brought something completely new to tennis. And I don't think he was aware of his demise at that point. I mean, he went on after that to beat Borg the year after. So Borg was really his hero. It was like going up against Superman and winning. So I wouldn't agree with that, Ryder.
Janus, do you want to say?
Yeah, I just a small interesting anecdote of a fact about that their relationship is, I think, and this is well documented, that McEnroe always tried to convince Borg to come back to tennis. He was always, he stated time and time again, I wish he would have played because we could have made something spectacular and that would have been something to see. He was always missing Borg after that. So I think, that sense of perfection that McEnroe was chasing was only ever at its, highest or at its peak when he was playing Borg. He could, I believe the Janus Metz you're referring is the '84 final, which is kind of the most one-sided, Wimbledon final ever. He was, there was no one threatening him in the game anymore, and I think he wanted the action that he got with Björn.
Let's go right here. Go ahead. We'll get a microphone to you.
Hi, Victoria Ahern with the Canadian Press. There's a Canadian phenom tennis star, Denis Shapovalov. I don't know if he was on your radar at all during filming of this, or have you heard of him? Do you have any thoughts on his career trajectory?
He's very young.
He's very young. He's drawing comparisons to McEnroe. So, yeah.
He's 18 years old and
a serve and volley guy then.
Yeah, he's a lefty as well.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard of him, but that's cool if he's coming. That's awesome.
He'll be on the red carpet tonight.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead right in the back there. We'll get you a microphone. Yeah, we've got the microphone coming right your way.
This is Raul Pinto from Radio Voces Latinas. How do you guys think that, especially Shia, the McEnroe has been handling his own image to this day? We know that many celebrities, artists, singers, sports, sometimes they end their lives like, in many ways, right? But how do you guys feel that McEnroe has managed his own image to the public to this day?
I think he's hyper-aware of legacy. He's written 2 biographies. He's written a sequel to the biography. He's recorded the audiobook. His wife is on the audiobook. I think he's very aware of the perception of him, and I think he's turned into quite a sweet man. He's sort of the bad Santa of tennis. He's a very lovable guy. Yeah, I really like what he's become in the public. Nothing but respect and love to him.
I think it's quite interesting that he chose to become an art dealer when he stopped tennis. I mean, that kind of says something about.
I don't think it was about art, though.
I don't think only for money, though, but it says something about what his search as a tennis player was somewhat mirrored in his afterlife. I mean,
he spoke. Well, go ahead.
It says something about the art market as well.
Yes, I think it does. I think you're dead right. I think this is a man who comes from Irish immigrants who were very into numbers, into money. I don't think he was as into art as he was into money. He says it in his biography, this last biography he put out. And the artists that he was interested in, like a Jeff Koons, these are very he was into the capital part. Famously turned down Basquiat paintings until they started making money, and then he became into Basquiat. He held on to his Warhols until he could get the right price for them. I think what he did like about art, and he talks about this, is the vulnerability of a person coming out and going like this, which he compared to athletics. So I think he loved the idea of an artist putting their neck on the line for something they believed in, which and I believe, and I think we would all agree, is what acting is. It is like athletics, ordinary men with extraordinary determination putting themselves out there.
Just one last question right here. Eli, we'll get you a microphone.
Thank you. Eli Glasner, CBC News. Shia, you speak with a lot of knowledge and respect for McEnroe. Considering the responsibility of playing him, how do you put all that you learned aside and then be true to your own performance?
Trusting my filmmaker, trusting my fellow actors, creating history that you can lean on, creating relationships that are real.
That is all the time we have. Gentlemen, thank you all so much. Thank you very much. Enjoy the film, the opening night film, and congratulations.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.
Hey